Today, we're in eastern Canada off the coast of Nova Scotia. Many people here depend on fishing to make a living.
My primary income is from lobster fishing. Our season starts the last Monday in November, and it runs for 6 months.
But today, we're not fishing for lobster, we're fishing for plastic.
We just left Shelburne Harbor, and we're sailing out about 15 to 20 miles, and we're going to go look for some ghost gear. We actually got the information from another fisherman that he had been snarled up into some gear here. He had to let it go back to bottom because it was too dangerous.
Ghost gear is any lost, abandoned, or discarded fishing gear. A lot of marine debris that washes up on shorelines and that's lost at sea actually is ghost gear.
And guess what? That gear, much of it is made of plastic.
Pretty well everything that we use in the fishery has a plastic base. So whether it be nets, rope. Rope is made from a plastic, actually. Looks like little plastic beads, and then they manufacture that into rope. Traps are coated with a plastic coating.
When we think about plastic in the ocean, ghost gear, or lost fishing gear, is one of the biggest problems out there. So plastic nets, plastic line, other plastic floats and buoys.
Plastic makes gear more durable, but not indestructible. After all, this is the ocean we're talking about.
If you was able to pull a plug and drain the water out of the ocean, you're either going to have mud, or you're going to have rocks, or you're going to have cliffs, or whatever the case. Whatever you see on land is basically the same thing you're going to see on the ocean floor. Trying to fish in an area where the bottom is very rocky and cliffy with sharp rocks, it's going to be hard on your rope, very hard. Your ropes have to break.
Ghost gear can be, well, scary stuff. For one thing, it keeps fishing without the fishers.
It's not good for the species that live in the ocean. I mean, they could get snarled up into something or trapped into something and not be able to get out.
But there's another way that lost fishing gear and any plastic can haunt the sea.
As ghost gear gets lost, the gear breaks down over time, which ultimately gets released into the ocean environment.
It will last for a long time. It will follow the currents. It might sink down to the bottom, but over time, the sunlight and the wave action starts to break it down smaller and smaller, and it breaks down into something called microplastics.
So if you see the metal is rusting away here, and we have some PVC plastic that's pulling away from it.
Plastic doesn't biodegrade. Look, it chips off. It'll go into smaller pieces, but it'll never just disappear.
But if plastic gets smaller, it takes up less space. Isn't that a good thing?
The reality is it's breaking down into these smaller and smaller pieces, which then are available to more and more wildlife because they can literally fit it in their mouth. They're eaten by animals at every level of the food chain, from your smallest zooplankton to your largest whales and sharks.
So what happens when plastic fishing gear becomes plastic fish food? We're still trying to answer that question, but we're talking about pieces smaller than a pencil eraser. And the ocean is the largest ecosystem on the planet. So researchers have turned to a more manageable marine environment, a lake.
The experimental lakes area in northwestern Ontario, it's basically a living laboratory, and we're using the lakes to better understand microplastic in the environment. We first get to know the lake very well. Who are the animals that live there? How big are their populations? Are they healthy? And then we can actually put microplastic in the lake to understand where does it go? Where does it go within the ecosystem, and how does it impact the wildlife in it?
Once the experiment is over, the plastic is removed and the lake can recover. The lake helps us understand plastics in a natural environment. But to get a complete picture, the team needs even more control. So they're also working in the lab.
La question qu'on se pose ici avec cette expérience au laboratoire, c'est un peu une sous-question de la grande question qu'on se pose aux lacs expérimentaux. Les poissons sont exposés à du plastique, en fait. Donc, c'est le même type de plastique, sauf que le jaune, il a des produits chimiques dedans, en comparaison avec le vert, au-dessus de ce qui se passe dans l'environnement, mais juste pour vraiment comprendre quel était le rôle des additifs dans la toxicité.
In the lab, the focus is on toxicity, which is one way that plastic can harm wildlife.
Le plastique en général, c'est une longue chaîne de molécules qui va être faite et va y avoir certains produits chimiques qui vont être ajoutés pour donner certaines propriétés. Par exemple, les plastiques un peu mous, en fait, c'est lié au fait qu'il y a des produits chimiques qui les rendent en fait mous. Donc ici, on veut savoir si ces molécules peuvent avoir un rôle sur la toxicité de ces microplastiques. Par exemple, est-ce que les poissons qui ont été exposés ou non vont grandir plus ou moins que ceux qui n'ont pas été exposés?
And toxicity isn't the only problem.
When animals are eating plastic instead of eating food, they lose out on nutrition. It might make an animal feel full, but it doesn't have the nutrients it needs to grow, that it needs to reproduce, to give it that energy just to escape a predator, to survive in the wild.
What is interesting is that in the control where there is no plastic, the poop tend to sink, whereas when there is plastic, the poop tend to stay at the surface with the plastic.
It might seem funny to think we can learn from floating fish poop. But if we're going to understand how plastic is impacting our environment, it's research like this that's going to help. And we still have a lot of unanswered questions.
How does microplastic move through a food web? An animal might swallow it. Do they just excrete it? Does that plastic move into its body? And when a bigger fish eats that smaller fish, does it increase up the food chain or does it decrease?
One thing we know for sure is that all plastic, from large nets to tiny peanut-sized pieces, can cause problems once it gets to the ocean. Problems for sea life and problems for us.
If the animals are eating the plastic and we eat animals from the ocean, we are eating the plastic. So this mismanagement of this plastic that we are using is coming back to haunt us in the seafood that we eat.
Plastic in our food? It's a hair-raising thought. Which is why ghost gear busters like Jesse and Mike are out fishing for lost gear.
There's no reason to leave that gear there if you can get it back. It's not good for anybody. It's not good for the environment or the species that are in the water.
And why we should all be mindful of leaving any plastic behind, no matter where we are.
It's important that we stop some of the sources of microplastics in the marine environment, but also that we're properly managing waste on land so we prevent garbage from coming into the ocean and generating microplastics.
This is what we got to work with. This is our life, and we have to take care of it.